Hello. Welcome. I think we'll get started here. My name is Gabriella Pagefort, and I'm an editor with Amazon Crossing. Amazon Crossing is one of the sponsors here of the Literary Translation Center, and this is one of the many things that we're hoping to do every year to help support our translators, who of course make all the work we do possible. So we're going to enjoy a short reading from three of our translators who we work with, reading three recent translations and talking a bit about the work that they put into that translation. So regardless of what type of book you're working on, of course, all sorts of things go into the process of translation, research, all sorts of creative writing, of course. And sometimes it can be something surprising, sometimes it can be something delightful, and so we decided to ask a few of our translators to share some stories with you guys and to share a bit of the text. So we'll get started. I'll introduce each of the translators, and then we will share some books at the end. We have a copy of each of the books that you'll hear readings from this afternoon, and then we also have a sampling of other Amazon Crossing books that you can take with you when you go. And we also will have some snacks and some champagne. So this is our thanks to you as translators and our invitation to new translators to encourage you to consider working with us. So I also wanted to take a moment to recognize the great work of a translator named Samuel Wilcox, who recently passed away this year. He translated Petra Durst-Benning's The Glassblower trilogy, which has been a great success for Amazon Crossing, and I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate his work. The first translator to read for us tonight is Simon Bruni, here to my left. He, in the past, has translated for us Antonio Garrido's book, The Scribe, and he is also the winner of a John Dryden Translation Prize, and he's going to read today from The Color of Evil by Armando Rodera.
Over to me. Okay, so I think the defining feature of this crime novel is the credible imagination that the serial killer has. Essentially, he chooses various picturesque locations around Spain in which to set up this series of gruesome tableaus of bodies severed, mutilated, arranged with various props to represent scenes from mythology. So this is sort of the defining feature of the book. And a gruff veteran detective and a nerdy civil guard officer are sort of thrown together to investigate. The first section I'm going to read is actually a letter written by the killer. So I just want to give you an idea of the voice, direct voice of the killer. The second section I'm going to read is some narration, which is closely aligned to the killer's thoughts. So what I'm going to talk about after that is how there's elements of the killer's voice seeping into the narration. So in a way, there's a complex voice going on there. Half neutral narrator, half one of the characters. So, Dear Miss Monfort, I should just add this is a letter addressed to an investigative journalist who's also entangled in the whole thing. Dear Miss Monfort, I believe our paths are inescapably converging. We're locked in the same circle of sensations, you as a reporter and investigator, me as the creator of some unparalleled works of art. And I need your cooperation in order to fulfill my destiny. You will be wondering why I've contacted you. Only in your beautiful writing have I thought I could discern some understanding of my deeds, aside from your boldness in obtaining the photographs that accompany your work. And this deserves a small reward from me, although you will already have guessed that everything has its price. Each detail has a rationale. The scene at the river, the position of the bodies, Greek letters, Roman numerals, everything has its reasons for existing. The alpha is not the beginning. We must look to the omega. In this era that we live in, nothing is as it seems. Even the dung and red cattle are part of a lucid depiction of this renaissance. I trust your expertise. I know you will be able to verify what I say. The game has only just begun. If you want another sublime clue, at midday tomorrow, at exactly 12 o'clock, go to the following location. Someone will deliver the signal that you await in order to continue along your path. So this next section is some narration that occurs just after the killer has killed one of his victims. She never woke up. Deep down, Jason was sorry he had to use her for his purposes, but there was no going back. He had to sedate her because he could see in her eyes that she intended to put up a fight, that she wouldn't be easy to overpower. and he needed peace and quiet to do his job properly. It wasn't exactly how he had planned it, not being able to see the life in the young woman's eyes. She had taken the best part from him, seeing the face of his victim begging for her life while he fulfilled his destiny. That sublime instant when she had known that she was lost forever, when he'd be able to see in her expression that a whole lifetime was flashing before her eyes, the supreme moment. But Jason owed everything to his master, and he could not deviate for one moment from the path laid out before him. Still, his throat burned at the thought of the lost opportunity, tearing the soul from such a unique person, someone so dynamic, so strong, so full of life. Merely stealing her heart, feeling it stop beating on the back of his hand, wasn't enough. His master would have preferred to see the light of life going out in the girl's face, but it wasn't to be. He had already made several mistakes over the last 24 hours. He couldn't allow a piercing scream to raise the alarm, even in an area as isolated as his. He prepared the young woman, keeping something for his own collection. So what I wanted to talk about was how I think a lot of what translation is about voices, finding different voices. And I've been talking to authors and also an actor in the last couple of days. And we agreed this is one thing that translation, writing, and acting has in common. Literary translation can potentially throw up so many different voices. It's limited by nothing but the author's imagination. And it just as an actor is complimented for their ability to play vastly different parts, I think this is a good quality to have as a translator, is this versatility to be able to reimagine all these different voices. So aside from being a literary translator, I'm a general translator. I just want to give you an idea of the different kinds of texts that I've done as a general translator. So I've done journalism, marketing material, contracts, instruction manuals, business procedures, video games, Spanish Inquisition records, corporate websites, wine labels, restaurant menus, government reports, EU notifications, building specifications, obituaries, academic papers. This is actually just a tiny sample of all the different things I've done. And at the same time, literary translation, what makes it different is that so many different voices are possible within that one field. And I think this is where the imagination, the creativity comes in, and it's why literary translation is by far my favourite form of translation. You often hear about authors who will wear a different hat depending on what part of the book they're writing about. And I find that translating literature is a similar thing going on. I'll find myself writing some narrative that's closely aligned to a character, or I'm writing some dialogue, and I'll find myself putting on the facial feature of the character. It's happening not by design, but it's just what happens. I'm sure if someone looked at me, it'd probably just look like I've had a mini stroke or something. But I find that there are some voices that I particularly enjoy, and that I can translate with perhaps more fluency than other voices. And I think this is often shaped by one's life experiences and the reading you've done in your life. So, for instance, I particularly enjoy doing historical fiction, and I think this is no accident. I've always been interested in history. Probably one of my earliest literary memories is reading Asterix and Obelix books, translated by Anthea Bell, I should say. And I also really enjoy translating colloquial language, and I'm sure a massive part of this is having spent a good part of my early 20s in Spain with crazy bunch of Spanish friends, going to a lot of parties. Further to that, I think the most enjoyable texts to translate are when the various voices are executed with skill and imagination by the author. This makes them more vivid, and it makes the reimagining process almost more instinctive. There's less conscious thinking going into the reimagining. It's more something that just happens and flows.
Thank you. That means that I can send translators to parties when they're struggling with colloquial language.
Exactly.
I think it's always hard as an editor to figure out what to say when a translator's struggling with something. I think you need to go to more parties abroad. Or, you know, there's a local community from every culture if you live in a big city. So that's kind of an exciting short answer to a hard question. Thank you, Simon. Up next, we have a translator from German, Alison Leyland, who's working with us now on Karina Bowman's The Moonlight Garden. She is, in addition to a translator, she's also a writer herself, and she's recently released her first thriller called Someone Else's Conflict. She's going to read today from Greta Milan's Julie's Butterfly.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Julie's Butterfly is a romantic novel at heart, but it's got a difference because its major message is the author wanted to raise awareness of a hereditary skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa. And if that means nothing to you, neither did it to me before I started on the novel. So that was one aspect about the translation. I went out and found out all about it. But she deals with it a lot in the novel in a very sensitive way, and I think in a way that would make anybody really, really sympathise with the disease and with the sufferers. The main male character, Bastian, suffers from it. And it's not only what's central to the novel is it's not only the physical symptoms, but the psychological symptoms of someone who's lived with pain all their life and the prejudice as they grow up with, scars and what have you. And Julie, the title character, she is attracted to him, but she also wants to find out what it is. I mean, it's not obvious when she first meets him, but his main characteristic is he wears these black leather gloves all the time, and basically it's to hide his hands, but nobody knows this. Is it a fashion accessory or whatever? But she knows there's something, and the more she gets to know him, and she does find out more, the more she wants to understand and help. So obviously in the translation there's a lot of putting across character, putting across emotion, and also general style. You know, this is a romantic novel, and so the general style is what you've got to have in mind, the readership, and just the sort of style that will appeal to your readership. It's despite what I've said about the deeper issues, it's a very warm, humorous novel in places, and it goes from that. What Simon was saying about the voices, you know, it goes from this lovely, warm, humorous style between them to deeper issues when it gets heavy, and so you've got to adjust reflect how the writer adjusts the voices accordingly. Again, Simon enjoys dialogue. I love dialogue, and there's quite a lot of sparkling dialogue in this, which, seeing as I'm not an actor, I'll try to do a bit, but it's go away and read it. As Gabriella said, I'm a novelist myself, and so I really, really enjoy doing fiction, and I find one helps the other. You know, as a writer, it helps me with both putting across the author's voice, and also at the editorial stages, at every stage, you know, I find the two cross-fertilise beautifully. So without more ado, anyway, I'll read you just a couple of brief passages from the novel. The first one, it starts with a prologue of basically Bastian when he was a little boy, and it's an introduction to EB, the disease we're talking about. Excuse me. The kind young doctor watched the small boy hiding nervously behind his threadbare teddy. His green eyes seemed far too serious for his age, and the lively impulsiveness she saw in her own son was replaced by disciplined reserve in this child. She sat down carefully next to him on the examination couch in the harshly lit hospital room and waited for him to peek out from behind his bear. She gave him an encouraging smile. "Have you ever looked really closely at a butterfly?" she asked gently. He nodded, hesitantly, in his characteristic way. "Then a clever boy like you's bound to have noticed how delicate their wings are," she continued, her voice melodic and soothing. He nodded again, but didn't venture to speak. The doctor was not put off by his silence. "You have to be just as careful with your skin," she explained. "It's as fragile as a butterfly's wing." Not for the first time, he examined his skin closely. He was covered in wounds. Raw blisters had appeared wherever he'd accidentally bumped against something. Some, the ones the doctor was about to treat, were filled with blood-streaked fluid. Others were crusted with scabs. Still others had already healed, allowing new flesh, new pink skin to form mottled patterns over his feet and hands and up his arms. Though his joints were also badly affected, his torso and limbs bore relatively few scars since he hurt himself less often in those places. But it did happen there too, usually so quickly that he could do nothing but look on as his skin split and the wounds spread. Pain was something he knew well, along with the burning and itching that accompanied healing. He'd never known anything different. The doctor watched the boy with patience as he dejectedly examined his bare skin. "Butterfly children are special," she said softly, "but so is every other child." His face showed his confusion as he looked up at her. The doctor gently stroked his dark hair. "Some children have big ears, some wear glasses, some have crooked teeth, and some hurt themselves more easily than others, as you do. Every child is unique and special," she explained. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." That day, he didn't understand the significance of her words. He'd yet to know how cruel children could be. He imagined the butterfly he'd seen the last time he went out, remembering clearly the small insect's joyful, fluttering wings. He didn't understand why his skin was made like those wings, yet he was unable to fly. And the next passage I'm going to read is more typical of the rest of the novel. Basically, Julie and Bastien have met. He is very wary. He likes her, but he's very wary of getting involved because he's always had to be reserved and keep himself away, and he's been hurt emotionally in the past. And to give you a little bit of context about this bit, he's a photographer, and they've come together because he's photographing some stuff for Julie's mother. They sort of got close, they got friendly, they got a bit more chatty than the original reserve, but at the end she asked him to take his gloves off. She knew there was something going on with these black leather gloves that he's wearing, and she asked him to take them off, and he did, and the minute he did, the vulnerability was out and he just fled. He didn't say goodbye, he just left. So this is the next day. Around noon on Saturday, Bastien was staring out of his living room window, watching the birds swooping through the sunny spring air. He'd promised his friend that he would explain his situation to Julie, and, totally incidentally, he felt compelled not to leave things hanging with her. But he had no idea how to carry out this intention. He could hardly call her up and tell her on the phone why he'd freaked out like that the day before. Besides, he felt an indefinable longing to see her again, however unwise that may be. It seemed like a sign from above when he saw a young woman who looked much like Julie turn onto his street. He leaned forward to study her. The closer she came, the stronger his physical reaction. When she stopped outside the garden gate of his building and studied the mailboxes, he was sure it was her. His excitement mounted as she lifted the flap of his mailbox and peered inside. Confronted by a heap of junk mail, Julie let the flap fall and looked up at the building. From his top floor apartment, he couldn't quite make out her expression, but something or someone by the main entrance attracted her attention, and she hurried towards it. With his nose pressed against the window, he watched her disappear from his field of view. It looked like she'd gone inside. Bastien hurried across the apartment and listened at the front door. Light footsteps were approaching. Then everything was quiet. All he could hear was his heart thumping as he waited for her to ring the bell. But she didn't. And she wasn't going to, which was hardly surprising given the way he'd treated her. Thrown into a panic by this realization, he flung open the door. Julie was crouched outside. She blinked in surprise as she looked up and stood hastily. Excuse me, she stammered. She blushed. "Oh, God, you must think I'm nuts, but I didn't want to disturb you." She stopped and took a deep breath. "Isabel got your address for me from Elena. Perhaps I should have rung the bell, but then I thought you wouldn't want me to. I just wanted to return these." She held up his black leather gloves. "You dropped them last night, and I thought you'd want them back," she explained awkwardly. "I was going to leave them outside your door." Her eyes fell to his hands, which were covered by another pair of gloves. "Oh, you've got a spare pair," she observed, then laughed self-consciously. "Of course, how silly of me." Bastien took his gloves from her. Say something to her, you idiot, he thought, but his power of speech had vanished. Julie drew her dark green cardigan more tightly around herself and folded her arms. Her brown eyes looked wistfully up at him. "I'd better go now," she said softly, and took a step back. "Bye." "Coffee?" he blurted out. Wow, he could actually talk. He gave an agonised groan in his mind as Julie regarded him uncertainly. "At least, I would offer you some if I had any," he continued casually. "But I do have hot chocolate, or tea, or soda, or perhaps you prefer water?" "Is that meant to be a joke?" said Julie after a brief pause. He was already asking himself the same thing. Could this get any more embarrassing? He forced a smile. "I do have a sense of humour, but in this case, I'm serious." Julie stared at him wordlessly, and Bastian's smile faded to a stricken expression. "Listen, I'm sorry about what happened yesterday. I shouldn't have run off like that. It was all just a bit too much for me." "No," Julie shook her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put you in that position." Bastian's eyes widened in wonder. He'd behaved like a complete ass, and she was apologising? She'd only do that if she considered him some kind of victim. He swallowed hard. "Would you like to come in? You must have one or two questions."
Thank you, Alison. And lastly, we have Alexandra Maldwin Davies reading from Queen of the Trailer Park by Alice Quinn, who happens to be in the audience in typical Rosie Maldana pink. In addition to translating books, Alex is also a translator of video games and apps, which is quite cool. And she's an animal lover who runs a charity shop for animals.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start. Is this on? Can you hear me? That's better. What do I need to do to switch it on? Move it a little bit closer. Okay. So I'd like to start by just explaining a little bit about the character Rosie Maldon from Queen of the Trailer Park. So she's a very sexy woman, as you can tell from the back cover here. She's outspoken. She's confident. Some might describe her as being a bit of a big mouth. I'd say if there are any British people in the audience, I'd describe her as being a little bit like Marmite. So some of you might not know what that is, but it's a thick, brown, yeasty paste that we eat over here in Britain. And the whole advertising campaign behind that is you love it or you hate it. And it's possibly the same with Rosie, and for the record, I love both of them. So she lives in the south of France on the Côte d'Azur, which is absolutely beautiful, but she's broke. She's broke, and she's got 3 children, sometimes 4 children, because she has a angst-ridden best friend called Véro, who's not very good at looking after her own child. So sometimes she's walking around looking for a way to earn a quick buck, living in the trailer, totally broke, with 4 kids running behind her. So within the story, she accidentally unearths a huge stash of money, which she finds in a dustbin or a trash can in McDonald's, in the playground there. So then she gets caught up in a roller coaster ride, which involves the mafia and some kidnapping and a missing best friend and a cute cop who she falls head over heels in love with. So I'm going to read part of the book. I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges, actually, in the book before I do the reading. It's very dialogue heavy, and the language within it is very specific to the region of Cannes and Nice. It's young, current, fresh language, but with a lot of slang and a lot of idiomatic expressions. But because Rosie isn't particularly well educated, or she doesn't have much culture, she makes a lot of mistakes. So she'll twist her words around, she'll invent words sometimes. So in terms of research, really, if I came across a phrase in the book that I didn't understand, I would never understand it, because I could sit in front of Google all day and it just didn't exist. So this meant that I had to stay in very close contact with Alice throughout the first book. Hundreds of Skype messages and emails going between us. And then luckily, an invaluable experience for the second book, which I'm now working on, is she invited me down to Cannes, and I could go around feeling feeling very lucky, and we read through the book together, which saved me so much time. So I'm very grateful. Thank you for that. I'll come again whenever you want. So in terms of my experience, because the language is influenced as well by Rosie's mother and grandmother, so there's some older terminology in there, but also the idiomatic expressions are so fresh and young, and she tries to invite the audience. You're a friend, basically, when you're reading the narrative. You're invited into her world. And I was a teacher in France for 10 years, teaching at university level, so even though I'm knocking on a little bit now, I did have a time when I could, kick it with the kids, and so, like Simon said, partying in the capital does help with some of that language. In terms of resources that I used for the target language, there are some good things online, such as the Urban Dictionary or the source for youth ministry, the online slang dictionary. There are places that I went as well, but often when you're looking up American slang, it can be quite sexual or drug-related, and Rosie, although she's no prude, she's not crude at all. She's not offensive. Another problem that I came across as well in the book, or a challenge really, but it was good fun to sort out, was that every morning when she wakes up, her mother's passed away, and she gets messages through songs. Now the songs are very specific to France, and to a French reader they would be very nostalgic, I think. It's songs that from the 60s and from the 50s, which for an American audience or a British audience they would have no idea what that was. But within the songs there are messages which give her clues as to what's going to happen in the plot. So I had to find international songs with similar lyrics that weren't going to mess up the structure of the book. So hours on YouTube, it was not bad. Right, so in this part of the book, because I don't want to give too much of the plot away, so she's looking for money. They've got nothing to eat in their trailer. She's having problems with Vero, and it's Wednesday, so she's going to wake up again with a song from her mother. And this is part of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything because it says it here, where she finds the money. Okay? Right, and I haven't got an American accent, but there are going to be some American words here, so you'll have to forgive me. You've got a nice Blackburn accent today. Okay. So the situation must have alarmed my mother, because the next morning, Frank Sinatra was on the internal playlist with Fly Me to the Moon. It seemed we had an emergency on our hands. The song was impossible to get out of my head. The little ones had some Cocoa Pops, which I'd picked up from Vero's. I had some too. It was Wednesday, a day off in France for many students and mothers. My social worker never worked Wednesdays. I dropped off Emma and Lisa at daycare. They had to go to school, poor things. But not Simon and Sabrina. They stayed with me. Simon being with us had given Sabrina a new lease on life. She's usually much quieter. Anyway, I decided to go to Select and left the scamps to play in the back. But Sabrina was screaming, running all over the place. She was a ball of activity, while Simon threw one tantrum after another, acting up like a Looney Tune. After half an hour, Tony lost it and kicked us all out. But I got a whole hour's pay. Awesome. A grand total of €7.50. I tucked it into my pocket and listed the groceries I'd picked up from Vero's. I told myself it was better not to spend a single cent, just in case something came up. We went over to the square where the Mickey D's was. The poor mites looked sheepish. We didn't go to eat, just to play. It was the same one where I'd last seen Vero. On Wednesdays, because they have more customers, they don't notice whether you've made a purchase or not. The children can just play. And they have all the latest stuff for little ones, supersonic slides and rubber floors, that type of thing. I was still annoyed that they hadn't behaved in the coffee house. As if I wasn't pissed enough, the kids began rooting around in the trash can. You've got this amazing slide and all these games, but you'd rather have fun in the trash? That's what we've come here for, is it? But they wouldn't listen to me. They probably wished they could just have something to eat. They foraged in the waste and pretended they were fishing for remnants of fries and nuggets. I was wrapped up in my dark and obsessive thoughts. We need to find something to eat, tons to eat, and we need to do it fast. I left them for a while, watching them without paying much attention to what they were actually doing. They found some boxes of promotional toys, publicity for some Disney fairy tale. I vaguely noticed Sabrina had a plastic figurine of an Indian princess or something, with veils and jewellery. She'd wrapped her up in a long, shiny necklace and was feeding her a feast of bits of curly paper. Despite the evil eye I was getting from a customer, who obviously thought I was an unfit mother for letting my children play in the trash can, I carried on trying to devise some sort of quick fix plan. I knew that what they were up to was gross, but I didn't have the energy to do much more than half-heartedly scold them from time to time. But I felt I was on the verge of finding a solution. What if I learned all about betting on horses? There are people out there who live on their winnings from the racetrack. You see that in movies all the time, right? I glanced at the kids and saw that they were going about setting a little table. Using the discarded boxes from burgers and fries, they prepared a lovely table set for 3. Oh, they're just too cute, including me like that. They've even put a plate down for me. That's when I noticed they'd put their new figurine in front of the 3rd plate and that I wasn't included in their game at all. They were scrunching up little balls of paper and setting them onto their makeshift plates. Convincing little yum and sounds punctuated their game. It was only when I realised that they were actually munching on the pieces of paper that I decided enough was enough. I stood and made my way over to them. Okay, that's enough, we're going home. Sabrina quickly shoved her new toy into her pocket. They joined me while continuing to either chew up the bits of paper or rub them between their greasy little fingers. Some game. They swapped delighted looks. This ice cream is so good, Sabrina exclaimed. I leaned in, trying to get them to cough up their pieces of garbage, and that's when I nearly had my first heart attack. When Sabrina spat out the piece of mushed-up paper, I could tell immediately it was green. Euro green. The remains of a €100 bill. If I hadn't been made of such strong stuff, I'd have fainted. I looked to my right and then to my left. Who gave you that? Nobody, Mummy, darling. Sabrina calls me darling when she knows she's done something wrong, but she doesn't know what. Where did you find it then? Garbage. I forced them to spit out the money. Then, as discreetly as I could, I searched the trash can. Some jumped up broad with a Hermes scarf, a Gucci bag, and her 2 tiny runts threw me a horrified look. I winced and forced my lips into a smile. Trying to look as normal as possible, I mumbled, "It's my baby girl. She's always dumping her pacifier in the most insane places." The woman turned her head as if she couldn't see me, and I stuck out my tongue at her while continuing to rifle through all the food wrappers. Sabrina screeched at the top of her voice, "You're such a liar, Mum. I don't have a pacifier now." When she didn't get an answer out of me, she didn't let up. "Liar, Mum. I'm all grown up. I'm not a baby anymore. I haven't had a pacifier for a very, very, very..." Her lips started to tremble. But still, I wasn't listening to her, or looking at her. I wasn't listening to or looking at anybody. I was so afraid of passing out. I hung onto the side of the trash can with all my strength. Sabrina's distraught tears finally pulled me out of my daze. As quickly as I could, I grabbed the manila envelope filled to bursting with crisp €100 bills. I then thrust it into the messy basket under the double trailer, which was free of twins at this point, and hurtled off at great speed. I didn't even look around to check if anyone had spotted me. The emergency message from my mum was clarified. I was going to fly me to the moon, where I would play with the stars, and I'd see what spring looked like on Jupiter and Mars.
Thank you very much. That worked quite well in Blackburn, actually.
It did work in Blackburn, yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, everyone, and please join us for champagne and take some books, and if you'd like to have them signed by their translators, and in one case the author, please do. Thank you.
Thank you.